Hey everybody, it's EJ from Eyedesyn.com, and today we're going to be talking about going further than your typical cel shaded Sketch Toon look. So we have our little birdie guy here, little birdie dude, and he definitely thinks that the bird is the word, and we want to go beyond just your typical cel shaded kind of look from Sketch Toon. And how I'm going to go about that is two different ways. So we're going to get a little sketchier and a little bit more organic. We're kind of handcrafted in the way this model looks. And like I said, we're going to do this two different ways. So one's going to be the shading, and then another is going to be the actual lines. So the thing I'm going to be doing is using the C4d Art Shader. Now the Art Shader, if I jump into my luminance texture here, you can see I have a cel shader here already. I'm going to blow that out. Let's see, was that anything? I don't think that was anything. And what I'm going to do is go over to right down here. We're going to go to Art Shader. And right away, nothing's really going on at all. It just made everything black. But what we can do is we can load a texture. And if we go into our content browser here, let's see if my content browser will load up here, and we can cheat a little bit and say, okay, what the heck is the Art Shader? And we can go into the sketch options here, and let's go to the shaders, and we can actually kind of cheat and say, okay, this is an Art Shader that some clever folk from, some clever person from Maxon made. And let's just open that up and see how this works. So this is the actual Art Shader, and you can see that we have a circle with this like sketchy kind of texture in here, right? And that's just a JPEG, and it's referencing a JPEG. And if we actually go ahead and let's write over that blue texture, you can see that if I replace that blue texture, we now have this cool sketchy kind of thing going on our bird. And you'll notice that the first thing is, if I move around my light source that's lighting and controlling everything else in my scene, like the cel shaded materials, because my cel shaded materials are being affected by lights and also the shadows from those lights. And I can move this around, and you can notice that that Art Shader is not changing as far as where the highlight is. The highlight's over here, even though our light's kind of pointing to the left here. So that's one of the things that's kind of unique to the Art Shader, is that the lighting is defined by this little material here. So you can see this shaded kind of sketchy sphere. The light is kind of hitting it from the bottom right here, you know what I mean? So let's go ahead and try to recreate our own little Art Shader here. So we can do this by, I'm going to create a new composition, and we're going to create a sphere. Let's create a sphere. And we're just gonna create, let's create a composition big enough, and it's gotta be a square, and we want it to be a big enough resolution, so if we zoom in, our little Art Shader texture kind of sketchy look is gonna still hold up. So maybe we can do like 1200 by 1200, and then we'll just scale up our sphere here, kind of fit the boundaries of our composition. And I'll double click in my material area, and we'll create a luminance shader, and then we'll bring our Sketch Toon, and right now I'm just recreating that sphere that we kind of saw in the Art Shader. And if I apply this, let's actually apply that to the sphere. Let's not use the camera. We'll go into interactive render region here so we can actually see how this will look. Go, and we'll use a light. So let's actually create a light, infinite light in here. Move this out of the way, and now we can basically choose where we want our highlight and our light source to come from. So like I was saying, that Art Shader, the lighting is defined by where the specular is on your little image. So let me jump back. Let me jump back to that Art Shader. You can see that we're trying to rebuild this, right? So the specular highlight is built down here, just kind of baked in So if you want so it's all, you have to figure out where you want that shading to be. Now you can also go into your art shader here, and this is kind of like a nice thing because you can actually rotate this. And you can see in our preview that we're actually rotating where that highlight is on our little sphere up here in our preview. You can change it that way, so you're really not really beholden or stuck. If you have your specular highlight in the bottom, you can always rotate it up, so keep that in mind. So when you're building this, you can also just build this straight inside of Photoshop instead of going this route, but this is just an easier way to kind of get started. So you can really just try to say, okay, this is how big I want my specular highlight to be. We can, one thing we could do is make this like grayscale if we wanted to, but we'll stick with some kind of blue for our little bird. So these are the colors we will use. I think that's looking pretty good. All right, so I think that looks good. That's our specular highlight. There's our shadow. So we got that. Just get this looking to how you'd like it to look. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just save this out. And I'm going to save it out as a Photoshop file. Let's do 8 bits fine. We don't need an alpha. And let's just pick a place to store it. So this will be our bird art start. Save that out. Make sure it's current frame 0. Render a frame. There's our big frame. Now let's hop into Photoshop. And this is where the real fun happens. So we're going to go and there's our bird art start. And now what we can do is I'm going to double click on this so I can actually start editing things. Let's go to Essentials. Make sure, hopefully you guys can see all this. Whoop. What'd I do there? Undo, undo, undo. There we go. All right, don't know what happened there. So what we're gonna do now is we can go in here and let's get our smudge tool. Where's our smudge? Let's go to smudge. There's our smudge. And we can get like a really fun kind of brush here, right? So I can go in here and right now my strength's kind of low. So now we're just kind of very subtly brushing and kind of deforming our cel shaded texture here. We can crank up the strength here. Let's make this a little bit bigger. And just kind of get a little crazy in here. Let's have some fun. Put your Bob Ross afro on and paint some happy spheres. Happy spheres. Happy spheres. So just watch out that you don't get any of the black edges in there. It's okay if you kind of go outside that sphere like this, because the art shader will kind of fix that for us. So we got our specular highlight here looking good. Now we can go down here and do the same kind of painterly, sketchy look to our darker shaded part down here. Looking good. Love this brush. Happy spheres. Spheres looking happy. And let's just see how this looks. So let's go ahead and let's just save this as start. Let's just do this art 1. So that'll be your bird art 1. Hit OK. Let's jump back into cinema. And here we go. And now we can, let's go to our bird. And instead of that art shader that is that from the content browser, let's get deselect so we just see our bird. Let's go ahead and so this is, we don't actually need anything in the shadows or anything like that. Don't need to load that up. All we're going to worry about is the actual texture here. And we're going to go ahead and grab that bird art 1 that we just made. And that's our little texture thing. And we already have our rotate there that I kind of screwed around with there. So now you can see that if I zero out the rotate, you can see that we now have our specular highlight here. We have this nice little sketchy thing going on. and you can adjust the scale. But you need to notice, so like I was saying, it's okay if you go outside the lines and you get a little bit of the stuff outside, but the thing you need to keep in mind is if you don't scale up your sphere or your image to kind of fit the bounds of this preview window, you're going to get this black edge, and you can see that on our character already. So we need to adjust this, and you can see just a little bit there, so we need to just scale that up just a little bit more. Still have a black edge, so let's scale it up a little bit. Actually, that's our actual that's our stroke. Never mind. So we're looking good, and again, you can scale this up as much as you want. You can have the specular highlight all the way up here. You can also scale this on the U and the V, but again, make sure you don't scale it down too much. You have a lot of control over scaling that original image that you made in Photoshop to kind of fit how you'd like it to look. And again, as well as just rotating where you want that little specular highlight to be. So you can see that already. If I go ahead and let's create a new material with this, and let's replace that darker blue texture right here, and let's go ahead and with our art shader, we're going to go ahead and let's change this to a darker blue. So what I'm going to do is go into Colorizer. You can see that now we can start editing those little shades with our Colorizer here. So let's go and let's just change this to kind of like a darker kind of blue. Say like this. See how that looks. We got a little darker blue, and you can really see what's going on up in our preview here. Adjust these knots and the midpoints and all that good stuff. Want to make this a little bit darker here. Maybe that's a little bit too light. So you can have a lot of control with the colorizer action going on here. Cool, looking good. So we got this nice little sketchy, slightly darker color for the wings and the eyebrows and all that stuff. Now we can do the same thing for, now let me rename this, not have all of these named E. So, so this is the light blue. This is the dark blue. And this one I'm just going to use for the yellow beak and all that stuff. So I'll go ahead and hitting Option, I'm going to just replace that orange. And let's just go back into our colorizer and just change these to some kind of yellowish kind of stuff going on. And let's get rid of the black. Make this look good. Make it brighter orange. It's really bright. Whoa. Whoa. Something like that. I don't know. That's really blown out. So you gotta be careful with what you're doing here. Make this darker. And make this even darker here. And adjust these knots. And looking a little better. Looking pretty good. Cool. So I'm liking that. Again, you can adjust that to your heart's content. And so there we go. So that's kind of, we're getting our sketchier texture. Now the cool thing about this is, say that highlight's way too bright, right? We can go back into Photoshop. Let me actually save this. Bird mid. So just save that out. Go back into Photoshop and just start going nuts again. Start going crazy. Let's kind of tone down that highlight. We'll mix a little bit of blue in there. Let's get more of the darker tones in here. Really start screwing around with this stuff in here. Again, you can color outside the lines. It's okay. Just like I said, that art shader kind of takes care of all that stuff. So you can smudge. You can just go ahead and just grab colors in here and kind of sample these colors, maybe make it a little darker, and paint over top of this. You can actually paint instead of smudging. You can do stuff like this. We can go back to our smudge, and I think there's a sample all layers option that will actually, yep, we can just start smudging that darker shade in here. Cool. So again, we're grunging this up. We're making this way more sketchy than it was. Kind of toning down that little highlight spot here. Adding a lot more texture to this. And I think that's looking pretty good. Let's see what that looks like. And what I'm gonna do is just save it. And typically you should not just save over it, but I want this is kind of like a cool workflow because all of those textures in Cinema are referencing this Photoshop file. So if I go and save this, I can go back into Cinema 4D, and let's just have these guys update. So just reload image, and that should reload all of them, I think. Just make sure, yeah, I think that reloaded all of my textures here. Yep, and you can see that that just updated. So that looks like kind of, you know, pretty nice, right? So that looks pretty cool. We toned down our little bright spot there. Go into our colorizer here, and we can get some of that like lighter blue back. Same with our colorizer here. Get some of that lighter bit for that specular. You have a lot of control with the colorizer and all that stuff. So there we go. Get a little highlight on that beak. So that's part one. That the art shader is really cool, really useful for getting a nice kind of hand sketched kind of thing going on with your Sketch Toon objects and cartoony objects. The other thing is kind of making your edges a little bit. Number one, your strokes a little sketchy, but number two, kind of making your geometry not so smooth. So we kind of sketched up our textures. Let's go ahead and basically this object's made up of a bunch of geometry, a lot of subdivision surfaces. Now we can go in here and kind of tone down the subdivisions here and kind of make this more chunkier geometry, which we can totally do. Or all of my geometry is underneath this young bird null. I can go here and to just kind of make everything a little bit less like a kind of simplified geometry. I'm going to go get a display tab and adjust the level of detail. And you can see that that is kind of giving us simpler geometry and kind of counteracting the subdivision surfaces there and stuff like that. Now you might have to move some stuff around, like the eyes maybe if they're kind of intersecting, but I think everything looks pretty decent. Maybe you have to move the arms out, our little wings. Move these out a little bit. There we go. That looked a little weird when we moved it out. So that's kind of simplifying our geometry. And let's go ahead and let's distort all of our geometry a little bit by adding a displacer. Going to our shading here. Let's get some noise. And the noise that I found kind of works good is you want to have smoother noise, and I found that this VL noise works pretty good. So we're going to scale this up a little bit. And you can see that's kind of chunking things up, you know, kind of really distorting things. So maybe that's a little bit too much. So we can go into our displacer here and see how that looks. Maybe tone things down overall for all the geometry here. But then maybe duplicate this displacer and find where our actual bird body is, like right here, and maybe have more finer control over how much we can distort the actual body. So that's looking good. So that's distorting the actual geometry. So we kind of sketched and deformed our texture with the art shader. We deformed our geometry using the simplifying our level of detail on our geometry, as well as adding some displacers with some noise, like so. And now the last thing is getting a sketchy outline, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go into our sketch material that's already added here. And the things that I like to do to kind of add this nice sketchy look is going into thickness and kind of distorting the thickness of our material by enabling the noise and making some noisy deformation along the thickness of our outline here. So we can go ahead and change the different kinds of noise. The sketchy kind of a noise that really I think after experimenting a lot to create a really nice sketchy kind of distortion is actually the is it? Oh, it's Luca. So Luca, I think, has a really nice sketchy kind of look to it. We can scale this up a little bit and get this nice sketch look. Let me zoom in a little bit here. Hopefully you guys can see. So we got this really nice sketchy kind of look. And again, scale that up. You can adjust the total strength of that noise. You can increase the thickness. So you're adding noise to the thickness of your object. So you can always kind of, if you have a lot of distortion, you want to get some of that thickness back. You can increase the overall thickness. But you can see how that Luca noise type really looks like almost like a bleeding pen or something like that. You can see the difference between Luca and just typical noise. And you can see that typical noise kind of gives you maybe like a pencil kind of look or something like that. So that works well. I mean, you can experiment a lot and have a lot of fun with this stuff, but I like Luca. Luca's fun. Luca's a fun person and noise type. So the same thing, I'm going to go and add some noise to our opacity. And this is really where you're going to get that really nice sketchy hand-drawn look, is because when you sketch with a pencil, it's not going to be a consistent opacity when you're drawing on a piece of paper or something like that. If you actually still use a pencil and a piece of paper, as I'm using a Wacom tablet and stuff like that these days. But again, I'll use the Luca noise type here. Let's increase the scale on this as well. And yeah, that's looking pretty good as well. We can kind of tone that down if it's a little bit too much of our opacity. We're losing a little bit of too much opacity there. But the one final thing I like to do is go into clone and actually clone some of our strokes. So we're just kind of duplicating the stroke on top of another, and now it's kind of looking like a charcoal kind of thing. And that is kind of controlled by how many times you want to repeat it. So you can have a lot of clones here, so we can really get looking like a charcoal kind of thing. I'm just gonna bring this back to 3, so we have 3 copies of our original stroke, and then we have our the major thing you want to watch out for is this line offset. This kind of tells you how far these clones are kind of offset, and these are the thickness options. So this controls how much random or variation is to the thickness there is. So you can increase this, and this scale actually controls the actual amount of the thickness overall of all your clones. So you can increase the thickness of all your clones by increasing the scale. And same thing with opacity. So this is adjusting the variation of the opacity of all of those clones. Really crank up the opacity. You can adjust the line offset a little bit more too. We're getting a really nice sketchy kind of look, and you can play around with all these kind of things, all these options here, and have some fun experimenting. That's half the fun right there. So I think that's looking pretty good. We got a really nice sketchy look. The one thing I like to do is, since you have all of your effects now, you can go back and adjust the thickness here. And we can go into our color and kind of lighten this color up. So let's just say Let's get some blue. Boop, boop, boop. And kind of lighten this up. Come on, interactive render region. Hit OK. There we go. So we're just going to lighten it up. And I think that, you know, a lighter sketch fits this composition and this whole color scheme a little bit better. And you can kind of play around with how light you want to go with this. So it's like you just painted this and you're coloring it in. You're coloring the edges with a colored pencil kind of thing. So let's go ahead. And I like this look. So what I'm going to do is I have my yellow sketch material here. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this and overwrite that yellow material. And then simply go into this duplicated material. So you can see this blue material is now on the beak and the legs. I'm just going to go and grab like a more orangey, that's a word, a more orangey texture for this. So again, trying to just make the outline just a little bit, just a tad bit darker than the colors we're using for the actual objects itself. So maybe something like this. That's a little bit too light. We definitely want to make sure our form is still maintained, so you can actually tell that that's a beak there. Darker like that. Sure, that looks good. And my eyeballs are a little bit too. I think we need to increase geometry there a little bit, so it's a little bit more round. It looked a little bit odd when our eyes were a little bit chunky. But that's another thing, is we need to apply that texture, that art shader texture to our eyes. So let's just make this our eye texture, and again, go into our art shader. Go here. We don't need reflectance. We'll turn that off. Let's go into, again, we'll go to Colorizer, and we're just going to make this all grayscale. On Grayscale Gorilla, and we're going to make this grayscale. There we go, and we can make this so we still have that nice little eyeball highlight, like our you know, the Pikachu eyes, is what I like to call it. Like every time I see eyes like that with a little bright spot, it looks like Pikachu. Pika. Cool. So that's looking pretty good. So you can kind of bring that back in, you know, play around with that. I think the one last thing I want to do is, I'm not very happy with the shade of blue on this. So let's bring like that. That look better? Yeah, I like that much better. I like that shade a lot better there. Cool. So yeah, that's and we have it animate. So the final part is actually animating this, and actually having what, you know, with 2D animators, they like to have, when they add some kind of noise or displacement to their character, they have a boil or some kind of undulation of displacement on their characters. So we can do that using our displacers. Now we have the one that's just the overall displacement, and then we have our displacement that we added to the bird body that's kind of adding a little bit more noise to the body of our bird. So to animate this and create that kind of rolling boil, as 2D animators like to call it, we simply have to go in to our noise here and just animate the seed. You can see as I'm animating the seed, not only is it kind of distorting and changing the look of our geometry, but it's also slightly changing the sketchy texture on top, as well as the sketchy outlines we have here. So we can now go ahead and let's keyframe this. So we have both of our displacers, both of our noise. We're just going to set a keyframe for seed, and I found that if you do it like maybe every 7 seconds, and I'll just set another keyframe, go to frame 14, move up a seed, another keyframe. Now what we can do is go into our timeline, Here's our timeline. And you can see we have our noises. And right now the interpolation is just set to the curvy interpolation, the spline interpolation, set to this kind of interpolation by default. What we want to do is do a stepped interpolation. So it's just going to kind of clip from seed to seed. And instead of just keep keyframing this and going one seed up and one seed up, what we can do is select both of our seeds, so both of our seeds here, and for after, we can go from constant and we can just go offset repeat. So that's going to continue and keep going up one value in our seed or whatever values here. As it goes on in our timeline. Our repetitions we have to increase here because right now it's only repeating the offset repeat once. We're only getting these 4 steps. We need to make enough repetitions to actually last us to get to the end here. So if this is enough, so we have our undulation. That'll get us to the end of our animation here. Cool. And actually, you know, I think the bird body displacement, I think his body's getting way too wobbly. It's a little bit much. A little bit goes a long way, and that was a lot of bit. So let's go and let's preview render this guy. Let's do 350 and do 15 frames per second, because what you want to do that also helps out this render is rendering at a lower frame rate. So I'm going to get our preview going. Where'd our preview go? Preview, picture manager. Oh, let's do this again. Make preview. Oh, it's still running. It's still going. All right, so that's still cranking away. So let's just kind of recap what we did here. So we wanted to add more, make this a little bit less computer generated. We wanted to go a little bit further than just our Cel Shader material and create a new kind of sketchy material using the Art Shader. And we created that by kind of basing it off of our Cel Shader right here. Took this image, brought it into Photoshop, sketched it up a little bit, smudged it up, and you know, even just smudging it up a little bit, I think really adds a little something to it. It's you know, again, a little bit goes a long way here. So let's keep talking about what we did here. We distorted our geometry by kind of simplifying it by using our display tag and bringing down the level of detail. What else do we do? We added our sketchy outlines by going to our sketch materials and adding some distortion noise to our thickness as well as our opacity, and then cloning our strokes to kind of add this nice sketchy overlay to it. You can see the difference here. So you can, again, there's tons of stuff you can play around with inside of the sketch materials that can add to different kind of sketch outline looks. And then with our displacer, we keyframe the noise on the seed of our noise to create this rolling boil kind of look that you'll find in a lot of 2D animation these days. And then we made a preview, and our preview's done. And let's see what we got. There we go. So we have our little bird, and he is just boiling. You got the nice little rolling boil. So just having that seed kind of being keyframed adds to distorts not only the outlines here because it's distorting the geometry, it's also distorting and kind of moving around our sketchy texture. So just by keyframing our seed, every aspect of our little cartoon bird here is having that little 2D boil effect, which I think is really, really cool. And our bird is happy, he's sketchy, he's stylized, he looks more handcrafted. You can call him a hipster bird. He might take offense to that because he's organic, he's renewable, he's handcrafted, he is small batch craft bird. But yeah, so that's using the art shader, sketchy materials, and Displacer to create some fun sketch looks inside of Cinema 4D. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.